This time on Callahan's Garage, we are back from our weekend in Helen and we're going to jump back into the Razor.
Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage.
Welcome back to Callahan's Garage, folks. My name is Callahan, and today we're taking another look at my 1964 Volkswagen Type 34. So in the last video, we did a bunch of frantic work to get ready to take this thing to a big car show up in Helen, Georgia over the weekend called Alpine Volks Fair. So we went up there, had a great time. Car did okay, you know, as we discovered in the last video, we do have a dead cylinder, you know, with very low compression in it. So if you haven't seen that video, please go check it out. But today we are going to take the engine back out of this thing. We're going to dig into it and see what's really going on. All right, so here's the old worn out engine in my Type 34. So like we discovered in the last video, our number 4 cylinder is barely making like 40 pounds of compression. So we're gonna get this thing out of here and dig into it and see what's really going on. So we're gonna do a brief tutorial on how to get your Type 3 engine out. I'm not super familiar with the Type 3 platform. You know, I've only worked on a handful of them over the years. And I know a lot of people aren't as familiar with the Type 3 stuff as they are with like the Beetles and the Karmann Ghias. You know, they're all basically the same. So we're gonna take a look at what all goes into getting this thing in and out of here. All right, so first things first, get that car jacked up way up in the air. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they're trying to get their Volkswagen engine out is not having the car high enough up. Especially once we actually get the engine out of the car and on the ground, you want the car to be high enough where you can get the engine out from underneath the car. So like if you have your Volkswagen Idiot book, you know, it literally says to get the engine out, set it on the ground, and then get a couple of buddies to just help you pick the car up over the engine. But if we just jack the car up high enough, we don't have to worry about that. So nice sturdy jack stands, car's up at a good workable height. We can get under it, we can maneuver in and out of it easily. So what makes a Type 3 engine different than our regular old, you know, Type 1 Beetle, Ghia, early bus engines? So most of this is basically the same. So like our engine case, our pistons and cylinders, our cylinder heads, our long block assembly is the same. You know, there's nothing really any different there. The differences come in how our accessories and our cooling is kind of laid out. So on a Beetle engine, that's often referred to as an upright engine because our oil cooler is standing up. Whereas on our Type 3 configuration, our oil cooler is laying down horizontally. So you'll hear people refer to the Type 3 engines and the later bus engines as being like pancake style engines because everything's oriented, you know, kind of flat in here. So our main difference is, like I said, you know, our oil cooler is laying down horizontally in here underneath our cylinder tins. Our fan shroud is on the back of the engine here rather than being standing up, you know, that big dome shape that blows our air down. This kind of sucks our air in and across. We have factory dual carbs in here. Like I said before, I've upgraded these, but our Type 3s had factory dual carbs. So our engine is configured a little bit differently, but it's still basically the same animal. And then when we're talking about removing this engine, it's actually a little bit less work than removing an engine from like our Beetle or Karmann Ghia. We've got a little bit less to take apart. We don't have to do as much disassembly, especially like with our dual carbs. You know, so if you have a dual carb engine in your Beetle where we have to drop it out the bottom, you got to remove the carbs. On this, we don't have to do that. So we've just got a little bit of disassembly to do and we'll be able to just yank this thing out of here. So first things first, unhook your battery. I've already unhooked it. Then we can disconnect all this wiring. So we've only got a couple of wires in here, basically the same stuff that you would have in your Beetle or whatever. So we've got an oil pressure sender. We've got our 2 connections on our generator here. Actually 3, this one has a little ground here. Put this screw back in here so we don't lose it. And then we've got our coil signal wire. So not a whole lot here, you know, just let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wires, very simple. If you need to label these to remember where they go ahead and label them. I've done this enough times, I know exactly where every single one of these wires go. So disconnect those, pull them out of the way. I'll go ahead and unhook my coil there. So just drag these over out of the way. And then on our Type 3, our coil sits over here to the side, and that can kind of interfere with our engine sheet metal as we're pulling this thing out. So we're going to go ahead and pull the coil and the bracket off and out of the way. And make sure you get something to put your hardware in. I drink a ton of Gatorade, so I've got all these little Gatorade cans hanging around. They're super handy for stuff like this. Next thing, we need to unhook our fuel inlet line that runs into our fuel pump. So just one little clamp. Yank that off. We'll stick us a bolt in here so we don't lose all our fuel. Make sure we don't make a mess. That's unhooked. Then we've got our throttle cable that runs right here to the center of our linkage. You can see mine's kind of cobbled together with two barrel nuts here, but normally you would just have one barrel nut at the end you could take loose. So the next thing that's different on our Type 3 is our oil filler is back here on the back of the car, outside of our engine bay. And it runs down through this tube and down into the bottom of our engine case here. So we have this little rubber boot right here. We need to disconnect this and get it off and out of the way. Then we have our big rubber bellows. So this is where all the air comes in from the back of the car down into our fan shroud here. So we need to take this off as well. So we got our big bellows air intake boot out. You can pull the engine out with this still in, just attached, but you know, you kind of run the risk of tearing it or anything like that, and you don't want to have to buy another one of these. So I like to just yank it out of the way. It is kind of a pain in the butt to get back into position, but you know, we don't risk tearing it with it completely out of the way. Then our boot over here, we just need to disconnect it. You don't have to pull it completely out. Just get it loose from our filler, or just get it loose from our oil fill tube, push it out of the way. And we're pretty much done with all the disassembly that we need to do. So like I said, you know, there's a lot less disassembly. We don't have any engine tins to get out of the way or fresh air hoses or anything like that like we do on our Beetle. So everything's pretty much disconnected up here. We could take a few pieces of hardware loose and we'll be able to drop this thing out. So we've got pretty much everything disconnected on the top side of the engine. The last two things we need to get are two bolts that go through our transmission into our engine case here. So we've just got two 17mm nuts. We need to take both of these loose. These should come out pretty easily. The only thing that will make these difficult is if somebody has swapped out the OEM style bolts. So your original bolts will have a D on the back side of it that catch on the bell housing when you take these loose. If they've been replaced, you may have to get somebody to crawl underneath the car and hold those bolts for you while you take the nuts loose. But we should be able to just throw a wrench on here, get these loose. And don't worry when you take these off, the engine isn't going to fall out of the car or anything crazy like that. You can totally disconnect these and nothing's going to happen. And of course this is spinning because somebody has already taken out the OEM bolt. Hopefully we can get this all the way off. Oh yeah, there we go. So that wraps up all of our disassembly topside. We're going to move underneath the car and get the rest of the stuff unhooked and get this thing out of here. So again, you know, perks of a Type 3, our configuration is all a little bit different here, so we actually have less to do. So our heater box connection is a little further forward on the car, so we actually don't have to disconnect the heat like we do on a Type 1. We just need to make sure that our heater box bellow is pulled back loose off of the heater box. Mine weren't even hooked up, so they're already loose, and that's all we need to do. And then the last thing we have underneath the car is just our two 17mm nuts that on the bottom studs of our engine case that go through the transmission bell housing. So we can take both of these loose, and then we're ready to come out. And again, you can take these completely off. The engine is not going to fall out on you until you pull it out of the car. So just take these loose, and then we can get out of here, out of the way, and get ready to pull this thing out. And last thing topside I forgot about, and like I said, I'm not as well versed in the Type 3 stuff as I am all of our Beetle and other stuff, but we have this little motor mount hanger bracket right here, just two 13mm bolts, and this thing's going to come out of the way. And all this does is support some of this weight that's, you know, hanging back off of our bell housing. Grab my impact. Okay, so just two bolts, we've got a little spacer, and then we've got this hanger bracket. Just set all that out of the way. So we got everything unhooked, ready to come out. I am going to do one more thing before I pull the engine out of here. I'm going to drain the oil out of it. I didn't think to do it until just now, but I definitely don't want to have to manage getting the oil out of it once it's on the table. So I'm just going to drain the oil out real quick, and then we'll snag this thing out of here. So got the oil draining out. Seems to be okay. You know, there's no metal or anything in it. I don't think we melted a piston or anything crazy like that. But there is a lot of fuel in it. You know, it's really thin, really smells like gasoline. So hopefully we just got like a broken ring in that cylinder that's just letting a lot of that fuel and compression blow by. But we'll see if my theory's right. We'll get this thing out, we'll get it on the table, we'll tear it down today and see what the damage is. Okay, finally ready to yank the engine out of this thing. You can see all I've got is my floor jack with a little block of wood on it. There's all kinds of different jacking attachments and hydraulic lift tables and different stuff you can use to get your engine out. But you don't need anything more than a floor jack. I'm just going to put this block of wood right underneath the sump plate on the bottom of the engine case, put a little bit of pressure upwards on it, and we can just wiggle this thing back and get it loose. So now that it's got a little bit of pressure on it, we can just grab our exhaust, grab our fan shroud, and just kind of work this thing back. A little bit more pressure up on this thing. And basically what we're trying to do is just get those bottom engine case studs to disengage from that bell housing, and then we can just drop this thing out of there. Just like that, it's back, it's free. We can just start easing this thing down onto the floor. And at this point, before you completely drop it down, make sure your fuel line is pulled back out of the way. Make sure your accelerator cable's pulled back out of the way. That way you don't yank those and damage them as you lower this thing down. Okay. And there we have it. Nice and easy. Just hung up a little bit on our tin over here, but no big deal. We're out, ready to tear into this thing. All right, engine's out. I'm gonna get the car out of the way, get the engine up on the table, and then we'll dig into this thing. So our fan hub's pretty stuck on here, so I whipped up a little puller tool real quick and see if we can't get this thing yanked off of here. There we go, it's coming off now. There we go. Alright, well, we're ready to knock this cylinder head off and see what this old dog looks like. So cylinder head looks pretty good. No chipped valve, no nothing weird going on there. But let's get this cylinder off of here and see how it looks. The cylinder looks okay. We still got a little cross hatching and stuff in there, but I don't know. These rings are intact. Well, I'm not sure. Nothing big, obvious staring us in the face. I'm gonna pull the rest of the top end apart. We'll get a look at all of our cylinder walls and our pistons and everything and go from there. And then we'll pretty much just take this thing off to the builder. We'll have it all built out and we'll get it back in on down the road. So we got this thing torn all the way down to the short block. Like I said before, you know, nothing big, obvious staring us right in the face. I think the main issue is just like all these rings were a little washed out. You know, we had low compression. We had relatively low compression across the board, and we just had this one cylinder that was really low. Every one of the cylinders was just like full of raw gas. So I think this thing just like really wasn't making any compression once it got some heat in it. And again, the crankcase was like full of gas. You know, each cylinder had gas in it. We had a bunch of gas in the oil. So, you know, really just not a good situation. But I'm going to carry this thing off to my engine builder. We're going to punch it out to 1776, get some all new guts in this thing. We'll get it back together on down the road. The goal is going to be to, you know, have this thing back together for the fall show season. So there's a couple of, you know, Volkswagen events in the fall that we're going to try to hit. So hopefully by then we'll have the engine back together, you know, and better than it ever was. We'll have a bunch of the rust repair on the car done, and this thing will be a really good driver at that point. So like I said before, we'll have some videos of the rust repair coming up, a bunch of Type 3 stuff. So if you want to see all that stuff, make sure you subscribe and keep sticking around, and we'll just keep digging deeper and deeper into this car. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.